Hello and welcome. This video is about our homebrew campaign. I'm the one DMing it. I'm also the one who has reimagined the campaign with the Lost Mines and also put together our homebrew rule set, which is based off the idea of survivors. Now, there are a few rules that I'm going to share with you guys. Just a few. There are a few secrets we're going to have. But one of the biggest issues that I have with Dungeons and Dragons is for the early levels, I feel woefully underpowered. And I honestly feel that there's not enough that I can do. And yet, the combat tends to be very, very lethal. But when I get to mid-levels, 7, 8, even 12, and then higher levels, 15 onwards, I find that the lethality can still be there, but often it takes a long time. So unless you're dropping your smites, unless you're using your high-tier spells, you're just swinging your rapier around. Maybe you get your sneak attack in if you're a rogue. Maybe you do damage if you're a barbarian. If you have an optimized build, yeah, it's great if the blow connects. But often it takes a while. And I don't like the scaling. I really don't like the scaling. I like the sense of suspense from the lower levels. But I don't like the lack of options. And so I was reading through the survivor rules, and I was thinking how fun that would be to capture that feel, but also to be something of a glass cannon. And so with this in mind, I put together our homebrew rule set. Most of it is drawn directly from 5th edition's Monster Manual, with a couple of exceptions. I've made a few tweaks where it's appropriate. Now, our players have lovingly nicknamed it Masochist. I named it Survivor Mode. So this is going to be Lost Mines, Survivor Mode, Masochist. And the focus is grimdark with sunshine, glass cannon, lethal combat. You have 4 HP. That's your base HP and your Constitution modifier. And by the way, you don't get to roll statistics. There is 1 14, 2 12s, 2 10s, and 2 8s. That's it. So for all of you high rollers who are getting 18s and 19s and generally hitting 20s, it's not going to happen here. But I also use the survivor as a base for classes. So we're going to have three broad archetypes. I was looking at the sidekicks as well. So we're going to have casters, we're going to have warriors, and we're going to have something in the middle. When a character is reduced to 0 HP, they'll make a death saving roll. If they fail that, then they roll on the injury table. Now, one of the rules for this is you only get one character. Just one. If your character dies, that's it, you're out the game. So that's going to increase the stakes. Hit points, HP, never increases. What you have with is what you're stuck with. Equally, you're not going to get a raise in statistics. No ASIs here. Every weapon strike can kill. Every single strike can kill. Magic is meant to be relatively scarce, but it's powerful. So I've switched some things around when it comes to the magic. For example, Magic Missile is now level 3, and there are going to be 4 levels of magic. I've also moved some of the higher level spells into lower level slots, and I have reduced the numbers accordingly. Now, it's going to be very, very interesting to see how our players do. There are 3 playable races. 4, in fact. Humans, elves, half-elves, and dwarves. I say 3 because I forget the half-elf, but it's there. Now, the way we're handling critical hits is if you get a nat 20, you automatically roll on the injury table. Orcs are going to start with 6 hit points plus their constitution modifier. Now, they also have the same stats as everybody else. Commoners, they're just going to have level 10s across the board, not level 10s, 10 in every score across the board, unless they're an exceptional character. Dragons are going to have a bit more HP, as they should. And I don't want to give too much away. I've also reimagined the Lost Mines. One of the issues that I had playing through it, and I've played through it about 6 or 7 times, not usually to completion, I find that there isn't enough of a plot hook. And so I decided, well, what if I switch things around a little? I've also done away with alignments, which as a AD&D player, which is when I first started playing Dungeons and Dragons, I find that to be a little jarring, but it's going to be interesting. Now, our player levels, they should run about level 8 to level 12, give or take, in terms of their power. And I've given them talents, survivor talents. I've given them a sidekick ability. They've got one special, which is going to be one of those rechargeable abilities that you often see with the monster manuals. You roll a d6 at the beginning of your turn after you've used that ability. If you get a 6, then it recharges. Otherwise, you don't have it. And you also get a feat. So that's how we're playing it. There are no class features, no bog standard classes. But there are going to be a couple of capstone abilities. And these will be drawing from the regular classes and a couple of other things. So that's going to act as the equivalent of level ups. As far as resting goes, this game is about survival. So rest is a privilege and not a right. We're not going to be adhering to the 1 long rest, 2 short rest things. Magic is going to be scarce. If you burn through your magical resources, you've burned through them. So you have to use your magic wisely. And if you go without a long rest each day, you're going to get a level of exhaustion. And that's going to affect your rolls, it's going to affect your spells, it's going to affect your skills, your attacks, your saves, everything. At 6 levels of exhaustion, you're going to pass out. Now, the way I have the rules here is that 2 short rests will stave off exhaustion, but you'll only recover half your HP. You'll only get half your spell points back, and we're going to be using spell points. And so even if you get 8 hours of rest in 2 or 3 bursts, you're only going to get half, but you won't get your level of exhaustion. We're also going to include dehydration. So if you go for a day without water, you become dehydrated. After 3 days, you have to take a DC con save or take 1 HP damage, and this can't be regained until you drink. As for magic, I have taken out any creation magic. There are also no cantrips. And the way I have done it is that magic is acquired through either the spellcaster background, a magical talent, or a magical feat. And these will give a certain number of magic points, and they will give these things called spell scrolls. And I'm going to put a little asterisk here because there's a caveat to that. I use the word scroll as an umbrella term. These scrolls can take any number of forms. So they might be a gemstone, they might be a rune, they might be a hieroglyphic or a pictogram, but they're magical items, and the spellcaster has to attune to them. And what they do is they channel their magic through the scroll. And then they have their spells. And they can only be attuned to a certain number of them. In this case, it is up to your proficiency bonus. And everybody starts with 2 in their proficiency bonus. And this means that without a feat, they can only have 2 spell scrolls attuned at any one time. If they've never attuned to that particular scroll before, it will take them a long rest. But if they previously have, then they can use a short rest to reattune to it. And they have to be within 10 feet of their scroll. So casters will usually have a scroll in the form of a gem on a ring, maybe on an earring, maybe on a tongue piercing or a belly piercing. But there's a danger with that, because if people know that you're a caster, they're likely to try to cut off your ear if it's an earring, or your finger if it's a ring. Now, we're not going to go into graphic detail, but it's meant to be slightly gritty, slightly realistic. It's going to be stylized. So it should be a lot of fun. And let me see. With magic, the costs are as so. For a first level spell, it costs 2 spell points. For a second level spell, it costs 3 spell points. For a third, it costs 5 spell points. And for a fourth, it costs 7 spell points. And if our players min-max, they can get quite a lot of spell points. But there is a cost to that, because they're not going to be good in other areas. There are a couple of specific spells which I've included as well at lower levels. So the Simulacrum spell, that is a low-level spell. And each simulacrum can create a simulacrum of itself. But because they can't regain spell points, there is a hard limit on this. So if you have 6 spell points, you might be able to make 1, possibly 2 simulacrum or simulacra. And they can serve as decoys. So that's going to be an important plot point. But again, I don't want to give away spoilers, but this is an important note for everybody listening. Concentration is another modification. So you can concentrate on a number of spells equivalent or equal to your proficiency bonus. And this means that you can have haste going and stone sting going. But here's the caveat. If your concentration breaks, you lose concentration on every spell. And if you are burning all your resources at once, well, maybe there's just 1 wave of enemies. Or maybe there's 2. Or maybe there's 3. So you have to choose how to use your resources and how to use them wisely. I've also included wands in the game. And wands are, again, a kind of umbrella term. And so they're going to have their own magical charge. Magic items are going to be relatively rare. And I've also increased the equipment list, as well as reduced it. So most of the equipment has been taken directly from the monster manual. So we're going to be seeing some fun things like glass bottles. Most of the statistics I haven't changed for these, because weapons are meant to be lethal. There are a couple where I have, because it would be massively overpowered. I've also reduced the list of feats. And I've included a couple of custom ones, homebrew ones, which makes sense. For example, I took something called Potent Attunement as a feat and placed it there, which is basically doubling your proficiency bonus when it comes to attuning magical items or scrolls. I've also included the metamagic list from the sorcerer, and I've trimmed down on that. And you can use multiple metamagics. You just have to pay the cost for them. So it's going to be interesting to see how our players react and what their builds are. Also, everybody gets all proficiency with armor and unarmored and with shields. And speaking of that, I have changed the rules with armor and with shields. So shields provide half cover, but they also have a hit point value. And the armors will provide resistance against certain things, and some of them have vulnerabilities. So with the statistics being what they are, you might get a +1 or maybe a +2, possibly +3 to your base 10 AC. So you might have 13. And then you might have a shield. So that might bring you up to 15 if you put your statistics in the right place. On the other hand, you might take armor and put your statistics somewhere else. And casters can still use armor and cast. But again, they have to be careful of their resources, and because of what they're taking, it means that they won't be as melee or ranged orientated. As to skills, the way that I handle skills is it has to make sense. So if your character has a background in something, then I'm not going to insist that you have a high DC for it. I might make you make the roll anyway, but that's to see if you get a natural 1 or if you get a nat 20. But by and large, if it makes sense, that's when I'll ask you to make a skill check. If it doesn't make sense, then I'm not going to ask. And I also don't like repeated skill checks, particularly for the same thing, unless it makes sense to. So, for example, you have a stone door. Well, you try it once and nothing happens. So you're going to brute force it? Well, yes, but there'll probably be a time limit. Or I might let you take 20. And for those of you who have played 3rd edition, you should be familiar with a take 10 or take 20, which means that you basically succeed, but it takes a certain length of time. And I assume that most characters will succeed at most tasks if they are trained, if they put enough time and effort in. With people, it's a little different. So in conversation, I will have them roll persuasion or intimidation or deception or performance, but it will usually be one thing per roll. So if I have a tavern keeper and they say, well, we just saved the town, so we should probably get free room and board. Now, maybe the tavern keeper is grateful enough that he says, yeah, okay, that's fine for 5 days. They go, well, what about for life? Well, tavern keeper might be grateful enough, but then again, maybe he won't. So we might make a roll there. And then they say, well, okay, but also we kind of like everybody in the tavern to give us money. And the tavern keeper is probably going to say, well, you can try, and maybe I will make them stand up and roll performance. So they might give a speech, say, well, we've saved the town, so, you know, open up your purses and show us your gratitude. And so there might be several roles there. Or maybe it's with the town mayor. And so they've asked 3 separate requests of the town mayor. They might have to roll for each one of them. But if they get a really good roll, say a nat 20, then that might carry through if the requests are reasonable. If the requests are unreasonable, or the NPC's mood is indifferent or friendly or hostile, they're going to have to roll. So generally, I try to keep skill checks low where it makes sense. I don't like a lot of skill checks because I feel that characters should succeed in what they're good at if it makes sense. So you're walking across the room, I'm not going to make you roll athletics. But if you want to initiate a grapple check, then you're going to have to roll for athletics. And so that's generally how I play the game. And you'll see more of that. I also have a rule of making things make sense. I'm not a fan of rule of cool. In fact, I don't employ it most of the time. There are exceptions, but most of the time I will go with what makes sense. And because we are playing a Survivor edition, the players are going to have to make use of cover. They're going to have to use half cover, they're going to have to use 3/4 cover, they're going to have to use full cover. Because if they charge out without backup, they can expect to be knocked on their proverbial rear. And that's fine. The NPCs, also, they're not loot pinatas. They are characters, they have their own desires, they have their own wants, they have a life outside of the party, and they're going to be doing their own things. And the way that I've got the narrative set up is it's going to be a decision tree. So if the players are over in one section, something else is going to be happening somewhere else. And the players can't be everywhere at once. Can they influence the story? Absolutely. And their choices matter. All of their choices matter. Do they have to follow the plot? No. But the plot may happen regardless. And then there'll be fallout from that. And so if they choose not to engage with what different NPCs are doing and go off and do their own thing, that's going to cycle back. And what they're doing may actually interrupt what the NPCs are doing. But the NPCs do not exist for the party. The NPCs exist because they have their own goal. And the party can choose to aid them, they can choose to disrupt them. And I've worked it in, and don't tell the players, by the way, that they can actually ally with potential antagonists. So there are a lot of different factions out there. Well, maybe not a lot, but there are a few different factions out there. And they can choose to ally with the villain of the piece. Because there isn't just one villain. There are several people with their own agenda. And so maybe the party wants to make peace. Or maybe they want to wipe everybody out. I don't know. But it's going to be about consequences, decisions, actions, and reactions. And speaking of actions and reactions, I've taken a list of things that they can do from the monster manual, various attacks. So headbutts and body slams, and I don't think drop kick is there, but certainly they have more options available for their unarmed strike. Which reminds me, speaking of the unarmed strike, I do consider it a weapon. Because if we look at natural weapons, they're classed as weapons. And it's never made much sense to me that in the real world, if you're a black belt, you have to register your fists as an actual weapon. So how could it be in a world where you can harden your fists, particularly if you're a monk, and use some kind of magical enhancement, these do not count as weapons? So I count unarmed strikes as weapons. So our players can infuse their fists or their feet or their foreheads, whatever it is. They can infuse it with magic with the smite spells if they take them. So if you see a guy punching another guy and they're using the smite spell, that's why. And speaking of the smite spells, I have included most of them. I've changed their damage, but the effect should be the same. I've also reduced rage damage. Rage is still there, but it's been reduced. And I'm going to give you guys a quick spoiler. Most weapons that are ranged will use dexterity, but the orc heavy longbow will use strength and not dexterity. Once we finish Phandelver and the Lost Mines, we may move on. It all depends. But I have a lot planned, and this is just the beginning. And there's more to follow. So keep your eye out for Easter eggs. And keep your eye out for things which don't quite fit. And this is a teaser. If there is something that jars in the campaign, it's quite possibly deliberate. And that's all I'm going to say. So thank you for listening to this basic rundown of the rules. I hope that you have as much fun listening as we have playing. We haven't played together as a group before. Now, that's going to be interesting. So we are exploring this. I playtested the campaign up until about halfway. So it's uncharted territory. And we're all friends, we're all writers. And it's going to be interesting to see how we develop our characters, how they respond to the game. And it's going to be more collaborative than competitive, I think. As the game master, as the dungeon master, whichever title you want to use, I'm going to be telling them what happens in the world, what the NPCs do. Now, a certain NPC might be out to kill them, but as the DM, I'm not biased against them. as a person, I'm rooting for them to succeed. But there are going to be consequences. If they behave stupidly, then I will not be held responsible for the consequences. But then again, the NPCs might behave stupidly too. It's not a video game. People are going to be treating it seriously in terms of the NPCs. Now, some of them are going to laugh, some of them are going to have fun, because they're going to behave like people. And that's how we're going to approach this. So I hope that you enjoy this. I hope that you have a lot of fun. Do be sure to like, subscribe, and comment. We'd love to hear you engage with us. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And I'm probably going to do another video introducing the characters, but I wanted to give you a brief rundown of the rules just to catch you up to speed. It's going to be fun. Thank you for joining us on Lost Mines, Survivor Edition, Masochist. Bye for now.